Hey guys, it's Madison Estes, writer and freelance editor. Today I'm going to be talking about the novel The Marionettes by Katie Wismer. I'm a big fan of Katie's channel, Katesbookdate. In fact, that is a big reason why I decided to check out The Marionettes. It's a paranormal romance with vampires and witches, and in some of Kate's videos she talks about all the world building that went into her story, about how some vampires are born and some of them are turned, and I thought that was a really interesting concept. So in this story, vampires have basically taken over the earth. They're no longer these feared creatures hiding in the shadow. They're basically just everywhere, and they've taken over everything. And Valorie Darkmoor, yes, that's right, Darkmoor. That last name is just, yeah. She's gonna get darker as the series goes on. I feel like I want to knock 1 star off this novel for her last name. So in this world, witches, or at least the talented witches, are sworn to serve vampires. They basically become like their servants, helping them out with all of their various vampire gangster activities. Vampires routinely seem to make people disappear, and they seem to be having these kind of vampire gang wars going on. And that is Valorie's aspiration. She wants to join the Marionettes, which is this very prestigious league of witches that are sworn to protect the vampires. During the course of this novel, she is going through the initiation, which is this 2-week period where they test the witches to see whether or not they're good enough to be in the Marionettes. Valorie is paired up with Reginald. He starts off being Reginald, and then later on in the story he seems to become Reed. I'm not sure if Reed is like a nickname for Reginald. It doesn't seem like a logical nickname to me, but nonetheless, I'm gonna go ahead and call him Reed because it's just easier to pronounce. Reed is your typical aloof, standoffish vampire. He gets paired with Valorie. This is not only a part of her training to make sure she's ready for the Marionettes, but it's also a test run to see whether or not they would be compatible as partners. Throughout the course of the story, various obstacles and tests are thrown her way, which is made even more complicated by the fact that someone has been slipping her a suppression potion to suppress her magical powers. So eventually Valorie makes it through all of the tests and all of the various things that are trying to kill her until she gets to the final test. The final test was pretty disappointing, honestly. I thought that it was an interesting concept, I just thought that it was not executed well at all. Mainly because the final test relies partially on her overcoming an emotional barrier, and it just didn't feel genuine and realistic. It had the potential for drama. It even had the potential for some story appropriate melodrama considering how dramatic the situation was, and I just wasn't feeling anything in that climax scene. In fact, the worst part of the entire novel is the ending, for multiple reasons. First of all, like I said, that whole scene just felt very flat. It felt incredibly rushed. There wasn't enough drama, and usually I'm the opposite. Usually I'm like, oh, there's too much drama in this scene, let's cut some of this melodrama. In this case, it needed a little bit more. Another major problem I had with the ending is that there is no resolution. I'm not just talking about a cliffhanger ending or an ambiguous ending. I actually like some ambiguous endings. Sometimes I can get on board with cliffhangers, but this one felt like the story literally just stopped. It felt like someone had taken the last few chapters of the book out. There was no resolution to any part of the story. There were at least 4 or 5 subplots that had no resolution, in addition to the main story not having resolution. This story did such a good job of asking all these interesting questions and keeping me engaged by raising all of these mysteries, but then it didn't answer any of them. Who has been slipping Valorie the suppression potion? It's kind of the biggest question of the story besides will Valorie end up passing the initiation, and it's not resolved by the end of the novel. Then there was the whole Wendigo mystery. Why was this introduced in this novel? I understand that in a series you want to have some unanswered questions and you want to have some subplots that don't have resolution in order to have those storylines progress throughout the novels, but you still need to answer at least most of the questions that you raise. And again, who has been slipping Valorie the suppression potion has kind of been the main question of the novel, and I was expecting to get answers. And it's not just the fact that things weren't wrapped up. That entire 3rd act felt so rushed. Like I said, the climax felt very flat and unemotional. And then there's an entire part where she ends up getting kidnapped, and it feels so fast that I wasn't even able to fully process it. And she's just this helpless damsel in distress, and it felt very unlike Valorie and just really strange for the main character near the climax of the novel to just be completely helpless and defenseless and having to be rescued. It just didn't jive with the fact that she's supposed to be this powerful blood witch, and I understand that they were giving her suppression potion even though they're not the original ones that were giving it to her. They also gave her the potion as well. But it just felt so random that she was just kidnapped by these people that weren't, you know, a major part of the story, and then tortured and then let go. And that subplot didn't seem to connect to the initiation or to any other main storyline. Another thing that drove me kind of crazy about this book was Connor. First of all, he cheats on Valorie in like the first or second chapter, so I don't feel like that's a big spoiler. But yeah, he cheats on her. That's how we're introduced to him, is when he gets caught cheating on her and letting a vampire feast on him. And he says later on that he did it for the money, and we're supposed to feel sorry for him because he's pimping himself out to vampires. He does do it because he wants to be free from them, although we're not exactly sure what his exact plan is other than I'm gonna get money and get out of here. But like, he still cheated on her, and like, we're just supposed to forgive him. Okay, we're not supposed to forgive him, but Valorie does. And I understand that that's like the only boyfriend she's ever known, and she's known him her whole life, but I feel like she gives him a pass way too much. Yeah, I was just really disappointed by that. I gotta understand why. I think that as the series goes on, Valorie Darkmoor is gonna become a darker, less compassionate character. And I think that, you know, you want to start off with someone who's a little bit weak, a little bit vulnerable, and then ultimately, you know, hopefully she's going to find her confidence and, you know, tolerate less BS in the future. At least that's what I'm hoping for a character. I hope that there's an arc there. She tolerates a lot less of that BS in future books. But for this book, it was a little bit annoying. There were a lot of things about this novel that I did enjoy. I thought the first 2 acts were excellent. I thought they did a really good job of setting up at least the series, if not the 3rd act. I loved Reed and Valerie's connection. I loved their interactions. I thought the dialogue was genuine and believable. It felt witty enough to not be like boring and mundane, but not so witty that it felt forced. And that is a sweet spot that can be very challenging to write sometimes. I like the general idea of the story, which is that witches are subservient to vampires and how they're paired together, and they basically do the vampire's bidding. I thought that was very interesting, a very unique concept. I thought that other than the 3rd act, which felt rushed, that the pacing was really good throughout this novel. A lot of times I'll read a book, no matter how condensed it is, there's still always something that feels like filler. But in this book, I can't remember too many scenes that I thought were filler. And then there was the fact that the author kept introducing all of these really interesting questions that made me want to know what happened next. The only bad thing is that she keeps introducing more information, she's introducing new questions, and she didn't answer most of those, but I'm really hoping that Wicked Souls ends up answering at least most of these questions. Okay, so I'm going to get into spoilers. It's a very minor spoiler, and it's something that I kind of saw coming, although I didn't know when it was going to happen. So if you have not read the book yet, I would recommend clicking off of this video now before I get into this spoiler. But before you do, please like this video and subscribe. Okay, so spoiler alert, midway through the novel, Valorie turns into a vampire. I know, shocking. The main character in a vampire paranormal romance gets turned into a vampire. That never happens. But what is kind of surprising is that it's actually very normal for witches and vampires to drink each other's blood. That's how they form the bond. And it's not normal for that to turn a witch into a vampire. In this story, people can be turned into vampires through a very lengthy and deliberate process, or they can be born vampires. And this story seems to imply that Valorie is born a half vampire. Which begs the question, is her father her real father since she has 2 non-vampire siblings? Or is Valorie adopted? There are a lot of different possibilities, and yet Valorie never even considered any of this. That's right, despite the fact that Valorie turns into a vampire halfway through this novel, and it seems as though it's genetic, she never questions why. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, it seems like a much bigger thing than it did when I was reading it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a plot hole, but I would say that it seems very, very unlikely that throughout the course of the story there wouldn't be some point where she's wondering about her parents and her heritage and why she's a half vampire. There were a lot of things I liked about this story, and it is a paranormal romance, and it did nail the one thing that any romance should do, which is to create 2 compelling characters that are interesting on their own and that have a really good chemistry and that don't annoy me. And I think that this book did a really good job of that. So as for rating, I'm going to go ahead and give this book 3 stars. That last act was kind of a mess, but I felt like the first 2/3 of this book were really good. It set up a lot of really interesting questions that I'm hoping are going to be answered in Wicked Souls. And I'm also hoping that Wicked Souls will just kind of help redeem this book a little bit. We'll see. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On this channel, I post book reviews, writing advice, horror content, and vlogs. And I just edited a horror anthology called Roadkill 6 Texas Horror by Texas writers. I'll include a link for that in the description box below if you want to check it out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.